Hello, we're here at Balticon 50 in the Inner Harbor. And we are here with Charles Stross, whose Laundry Files series of novels has been doing extremely well in bookstores and certainly on my shelf. Charles, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm pleased to be here.
Let's kind of go from back to the beginning. I mean, as a man who's won 3 Hugo Best Novellas, as a man who's won the 2013 Locus Award, it all had to start somewhere. When did you decide that you were going to write?
When I was about 6, actually, it's been something I wanted to do all along. In fact, I have a long prehistory of semi-success as an SF writer in the UK before I was ever published in the States. I was ineligible for the Campbell Award when I sort of first broke with lobsters around 2002 because I'd sold a short story to Harry Harrison in 1989. My first short fiction sale, in fact, was to Interzone in 85. So I've actually been writing and selling SF for selling for over 30 years and writing it for more like 40. And wow. You really don't want to see the early works. I learnt the slow and hard way.
You write in all areas. I mean, you've done short story, you've done novella, you've certainly done novels, you've done standalones, you've done series, you've done fantasy, you've done, even though the library series is kind of fantasy / mathematical fiction. Did you start writing a certain type of story, or do you just turn to whatever you need in order to tell the story you have to tell?
Pretty much the latter. It's telling stories first. I tend to think of genres as artificial barriers imposed on the creative process. Mm-hmm. Knowing that something is fantasy or science fiction or horror or romance or whatever doesn't really tell you much about the story itself, other than it bears a vague resemblance at certain points to works by other writers, and it tells bookstore clerks or librarians where to shelve like with like. What I do, I like to think of as actually Charlie Stross novels rather than any particular subgenre.
Perfectly reasonable approach.
And they have aspects of whatever I'm working on at the time. The Laundry Files, for example, could be pigeonholed as horror, could be pigeonholed as science fiction humor, it could be pigeonholed as spy thrillers. It's all of the above.
It's interesting. Before we get to the Laundry File, because that's the last thing we've been reading from you, you did a series called of The Merchant Princes.
Yeah. A
number of books that were based initially classified as and marketed as fantasy because they involved alternate worlds and such. And then when they were reissued recently as 3 individual novels, it was marketed more as a techno thriller.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. Prince Otto von Bismarck remarked that anybody who likes law or sausages should pay absolutely no attention to how either of them are made. And the same goes for fiction, especially book contracts. When I sold my first novels to Ace, Singularity, Sky and Iron Sunrise, the contract they issued, a lengthy one, had an option clause in it, meaning that they had a right of first refusal on my next science fiction novel. So... Obvious, as I handed these in fairly early, my agent's immediate remark was, well, Charlie, they won't buy any more books from you until they've got sales figures on the first of these, and it's not going to come out for 2 years. So if you want to keep writing stuff in the near term, your best bet is to write a big fat fantasy or alternate history series or something like that, which we can sell to another publisher without breaking the contract. But being perhaps somewhat sensitive on the issue, Tor took a very emphatic, we're going to market this as fantasy approach to The Merchant Princes, which I prefer to think of as they take a couple of cliches out of the portal fantasy or secondary world fantasy subgenre, mm-hmm. but then treat it deadpan seriously as present day SF. So they got a strong fantasy presentation in the initial marketing, but that's not actually reflected so much in the content of the books. The reissued, the omnibus, originally what I handed in was a 600-page novel, but it was cut into segments for publication, again, as a business decision at Tor. The omnibus editions are much closer to the original intended format.
How do you, when they decide to dismember and sell the individual body parts of a work of yours, how do you get it actually actively, and do you have to be actively involved in order to make sure they don't do irreparable harm?
Well, it's along the lines of, hi Charlie, we've decided if you want to cut this book in half, you have 1 week to send us revised versions.
Oh, bollocks.
And if you don't want to, well, you can always send the contract and the money back.
Oh, good Lord.
That's not going to happen with the new trilogy. It's pre-segmented.
And that's what we should talk
Yeah.
about. There is a new Merchant Prince's trilogy
Yep.
that will begin. The first book is coming out in January, is that correct?
That's correct.
2017?
It's been in gestation for about 3 years now. Actually, it probably won't be sold as Merchant Princes at all.
Really?
The new book has a title of Empire Games, and I'm not certain what Tor's marketing intend to do with it, but I think they're probably going to call it the Empire Games Trilogy. It is, however, set in continuity with the Merchant Princes 17 years later, has some of the same characters recurring in it, and picks up the story effectively after the dust has settled from the first series.
So it's same world, same
Yes.
world built, just a different timeline with some old characters and some new characters?
That is correct. Actually, I originally was aiming to try and get it out in 2014, 2015, but things slipped a couple of years. It's set in 2020, so it sort of segues from originally being marketed as Portal Fantasy to near future SF.
I could see why that would happen.
And my preferred description of it is Charlie's big fat post-Edward Snowden techno thriller with parallel universes.
I could see where that would have a market. Now that we know that that's coming out, let's talk a little bit about the Laundry Files. One of the fascinating things about this series of novels and the stories is we're following a couple of very interesting characters who are, in their own words, marching as slowly as possible to their inevitable doom based upon the work they are engaged in. We've got Bob Howard, and we've got Dominique O'Brien, who have met as a part of the work that they do for the Laundry, the British paranormal intervention, safety, security entity that was created in the World War II, courtesy of some of the work of Alan Turing. And you've made no bones about the fact that what they did to Alan Turing was an absolutely abysmal, idiotic move on their part. And we're not talking about the code breaking, we're talking about something completely different.
Yeah. Actually, to butt in on that one, the British government itself has admitted that. They've formally apologised and said it was a really stupid, boneheaded move. But I think I began riffing off that in that novel before this was sort of the general consensus opinion in the UK.
But you basically present these novels essentially as diaries being written by mostly Bob after the fact as a way of documenting the incident itself and the events preceding and after the incident, and thereby telling a story. When you started, was this just, did you just see this as the best way of just jumping right in and being able to provide a more texture because you have all of Bob's thoughts and emotions and everything as a part of it?
Actually, it's a bit clumsier and cruder than that. I began writing The Atrocity Archive, the short novel that it sprang from, in 1999. And it was a learning exercise, and I'd written this short novel, first-person present tense viewpoint, and it sort of worked. The problem is, when I went back to add more stuff, I wrote the novella The Concrete Jungle in 2003. Mm-hmm. I wrote the second novel, The Jennifer Morgue, in 2005. I gradually discovered that firstly, the universe was getting more complex. Secondly, I had made mistakes or inconsistencies earlier in the series or had not thought things through properly. Mm-hmm. So I needed to retcon various factors into the setting. One of the first things to retcon in is Bob freely admits he's an unreliable narrator. As he is promoted through the organisation, he learns that certain things he thought was a joke initially are actually really fundamentally important. The paperclip audits, for example, they serve a purpose. They're a standing joke in the Atrocity Archives, and by the Fuller Memorandum, they're deadly serious. Other things, the idea that they would be basically working diaries to preserve institutional knowledge in event of the death of the agent is a fairly grim concept to add on. It's not one that occurred to me until I think about book 3, but it made a lot of sense in context, and it allows me to maintain a degree of suspense over the fate of the narrator, because if you've got a first-person present tense narrative, it's a bit of a giveaway that the narrator lives,
Yes.
usually. It's very hard to kill the narrator off. Some people have done it. Mira Grant, aka Shauna Maguire, did it in the first of her Newsflesh novels, where the first-person narrator is killed 3/4 of the way through the book. And isn't that a bit of a gut punch? I wanted to have some of that degree of uncertainty hanging over the reader as to whether or not the person they're reading a journal of is still alive. If not in the current, if not in the current book, then in the next.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing that occurred to me is if Bob is keeping this journal, so is everybody else. And when I got to the Rhesus chart, I suddenly realised there's a significant event at the end of the Rhesus chart. And wouldn't it be useful to look at Moe's diary and see the events in that book from a completely different perspective?
Now, and we'll talk, the Rhesus chart, yeah, some big stuff happens. Big stuff. A major change. And in an individual who has already undergone significant change, and quite frankly, when I remember reading about it, significant damage. I mean, he's carrying some serious war wounds. I mean, his upper arm strength isn't that great anymore, and a number of other things as a result of his adventures. And so the next book in this series, the book that's currently out now and will soon be superseded by a new novel, we have Moe, that's Bob's wife, Dominique O'Brien, telling the story. Did you consider anything in regards to the voice or the style of narration that would occur with Dominique as opposed to Bob?
Yeah. Bob he's a somewhat limiting viewpoint because he has a very strong capacity for self-deception and self-delusion. His ability,
in what way?
His ability to delude himself about the world he's living is actually a defense mechanism. He'd go stark raving mad if he had to confront the reality of what he deals with. So he has a sense of humor that he applies as gallows humor, laughing on his way past the graveyard. But he's also able to kid himself that things are okay, things are going to be okay, we just have to get through the next job and sort everything out. And this isn't actually true the whole time.
And then we can go on holiday.
Yeah, and it's as true for his personal life as it is for his professional life. He's able to kid himself that things are okay in his marriage when they're not necessarily. Moe has a very unvarnished view of Bob because she's been married to him for a decade. She also has a very different perspective on the work they're doing. The Annihilation score. When I'm writing a book, I try to come up with what the elevator pitch should be, the very short one-sentence pitch you use when you're stuck in the elevator with Steven Spielberg trying to convince him to make the movie. And there are 2 elevator pitches for the Annihilation score. The first is, it's a serious literary character study of a middle-aged female civil servant's simultaneous marital, career and nervous breakdown. There are superheroes in the background. The other elevator pitch is, well, the flippant one is Bob's ex's former superhero team and fight crime. But Moe is under an enormous amount of stress. I'm not sure whether I should spoil the book by saying where things go, but she is pitched in to set up and run a new small British government agency for dealing with efflorescences of superpowers that people are waking up with in the morning and finding they can fly or they can raise the dead and similar. A certain proportion decide that this is possession by demons or it's religious miracles, but another proportion go by the other role model we've got in Western society and think that they're superheroes or worse, supervillains. And the British government doesn't take a very positive view of this. Mm-hmm. And they decide to set up an agency as part of a Home Office for Justice Ministry to run an official government superhero team and provide a suitable role model for keeping these idiot vigilantes in check, point them at the police as auxiliary police officers rather than allow them to run rampant and beat up suspects, destroy crime scenes and evidence, and result in miscarriages of justice.
I remember a novel I read once, I think it was a Heinlein novel, where they said that the reason you have that when you have people who have the natural proclivity to be wolves, what you do is you teach the wolves to guard the sheep, not to eat the sheep. And I suppose to a certain extent, someone with extraordinary powers, if you empower them to protect rather than to exploit, and they buy into the pitch, it makes for a much easier coexistence.
Yeah, but it's much easier said than done, especially in the world of the laundry.
The world of the laundry is a very weird and strange and wonderful and frightening. And is there any place I could go where I wouldn't be in, right next door to the pit of the seventh hell of some other dimensional universe, kind of a set of stories? And
there are no safe places there. Next month's novel, The Nightmare Stacks, shifts again viewpoint away from Bob and Mo. There will be another Bob novel coming up, that's in 2017, but this year's one focuses on Alex, a young character who's introduced in the research chart. Alex is a mathematician, a quant basically. He's a PhD in mathematics, he's working for a bank, when he accidentally stumbles upon an algorithm that infects him with vampirism, or something not very easily distinguishable from vampirism.
The powers and the liabilities in some instances parallel what we commonly know as vampirism.
Yeah, but rather than it being, ooh, cool, I'm going to hang out in goth nightclubs and drink sexy babes' blood all night, it's more a case of, damn, I've got this really unpleasant blood-transmitted viral disease. It's not that good to be a vampire in the laundry universe. And Alex is an interesting character, but he's rather different from Bob and Mo. He's, in many respects, as naive as Bob was in the early days of the Atrocity Archive, but he has much, much, much greater powers and much greater agency. And as the laundry slides inexorably towards the abyss and the stars coming right and Return of the Elder Gods, the agency is preparing for a major confrontation, and they've decided they need a new national headquarters. They've had really bad luck with their headquarter buildings in the last couple of books. So
I've noticed.
Yeah, they're going to have much, much worse luck with their proposed new headquarters in the Nightmare Stacks.
Oh my God.
In fact, by the time the dust is settling at the end of the Nightmare Stacks, the Prime Minister is demanding to know why he wasn't informed of this agency. And the next laundry novel after this, The Delirium Brief, which should be out in 2018, The Delirium Brief, which should be out in 2017, opens with Bob being dragged into a television studio in London to be interviewed live on the BBC's Newsnight flagship news programme on the vexatious question of elven asylum seekers.
You are totally deranged, sir, and thank you so much for that. Well, we're running short of time, so let's go over what's coming up, because we're always greedy for that. We've got the new laundry file, the Nightmare Stacks, and that's coming out we're taping in May of 2016. That's coming out in June.
Yeah.
And then the next book in the Merchant Princess trilogy, or the Empire Games trilogy.
Empire Games is due out in January 2017, and in June or July 2017 we should see The Delirium Brief, the 8th laundry novel.
Right.
January 2018 should see Dark State, the 2nd Empire Games book, or the 8th Merchant Prince's novel, depending on what, followed in summer by something unspecified, but it won't be a laundry novel. I have written 8 sequels in a row in one series or another, and I'm finally getting ready to write something new and original and different to surprise everybody with.
Good for you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Charles, we're out of time, but thank you for talking to us. Thank you for taking the time. I know this is a busy weekend for you. Conventions always are for established and popular writers like yourself. And so we do thank you for coming by, and we look forward to a laundry list of novels coming out soon from an author we happen to be sitting with. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this edition of Fast Forward. We hope you enjoyed coming and visiting us, and we hope you come see us again. Until then, this is Tom Schad saying, take care.